What is your take
understand.
on Bob Lazar?
Well, we looked into the Bob Lazar story, and but only from a certain relatively superficial level. Looked at we found out what his clearance levels supposedly were, and so on, which came back saying it was not high enough to be doing what he says he was doing. On the other hand, it may just simply be, yeah, it was better than that, but we didn't have the access to see that. So when I hear his physics descriptions, it's a puzzle. It seems not exactly as I would anticipate might be the technology behind the craft, but I can't absolutely write him off. So it's an enigma, and I don't have any hard data to prove one way or the other. So it's I know you've talked to him. And,
Yeah,
uh,
it's a fascinating puzzle.
It is a fascinating puzzle.
Because that would be the place, S4 would be the place where they would do that kind of work. I mean, if you wanted to do something like that in complete privacy and secrecy, you'd do it in the middle of the Nevada desert, very protected.
That's true. Right.
Outside of Area 51.
So even when people that have high clearances go and say, well, tell me about this. What's behind this? Who knows? If it's a special access program, an SAP, it might be, say, no, we're going to tell you that, he didn't do anything of significance here. In fact, he might have done something of significance. There's just no way of telling from the outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the actual generator, the thing that powers the craft that Lazar talked about, what was your take on that? This idea that it was element 115, that when it encounters high radiation, it has some sort of an anti-gravitational effect, some warp effect.
Well, there are two aspects. One is, what is the material or mechanisms that generate the effects? And then the other is, are the effects being described reasonable descriptions of the kind of effects you think are associated with such craft? On the element 115, as you know, in the general scientific community, we've seen element 115, but it's very short-lived. So it's hard to evaluate that, and at this point, there's no evidence that's it.
So it was we should explain to people, it was theoretical at one point until they detected it using, was it a Large Hadron Collider or another particle collider?
Right now, I think it was a particle collider in Soviet Union or in Russia.
And it's very short-lasting.
Yeah.
But the idea is that what Lazar was in possession of, or what the craft was powered by, was some sort of a stable version of element 115.
That's what he says. So, in general, it was known that and predicted that there was an island of stability, as we call it, on some of these higher elements in the periodic table that are beyond uranium and so on. But really no data predicted as to what their lifetimes would be. And so element 115 is in that bunch, and when he first discussed it, it hadn't been seen yet.
Or this is way back in 1989.
Way back, that's right. But eventually that element was detected, although the version of it that was detected had a very short lifetime. But of course, there may be some other isotope of that element that could have a long lifetime. Who knows? So it's just hard to evaluate. So it sits in my gray box, as I say. But his description of the anti-gravity effects and so on, that's an area that is well described as what you might expect.